Welcome to the OPSQC Podcast, helping entrepreneurs, innovators, and small business owners scale to profitability. The goal of this podcast is to showcase real businesses, real owners, tell their stories, learn a little, and have some fun while doing it. In today's episode, we welcome ProShop ERP co-founder, Paul Van Metre. ProShop is based out of Bellingham, Washington. The story goes back to when Paul and some friends from college who were all gearheads decided to start a CNC shop. Not as easy as it sounds. As fate would have it, though, the processes they developed internally would then turn into a much more lucrative offering, which grew into what ProShop is today. Please welcome Paul Van Metre. Please welcome Paul Van Metre of ProShop. Paul, welcome to the show.
Jared, thank you for having me. I'm excited. It's going to be a fun time.
Absolutely. So, Paul, for the listeners, can you give some background on ProShop, explain your business, a little bit of backstory there?
Yeah, absolutely. So my partners and I actually started a machine shop right out of college back in 1997. We had all gone through this very hands-on sort of technical engineering type program where we actually designed and built race cars for the Formula SAE competition. Great national, program, and fell in love with machining and manufacturing and actually working together as a team. Just really enjoyed working together and working on tough problems under tight deadlines. And so we said, you know what, that sounds like a machine shop. So we, one of my partners took out a second mortgage on his house. And with that money, we bought a Haas VF4 brand new, and then a used manual mill and lathe, and had a few months of rent left over, and started knocking on doors looking for work. And so that was 97, and never having had any other really professional experience besides maybe delivering pizzas. We were definitely just learning as we went in the trenches, and just grew the company over several years. So when we started, of course, we had very little money and experience. So we tried to organize our business using spreadsheets, right? We had Excel, and one of my partners, Kelsey, was pretty good with Visual Basic. So he made lots of cool macros that we would spawn workbooks and copy sheets. And so we'd use that for our work orders and our cutting tool management and our work instructions and all our inspection forms. And we even had these, of course, back then it was all CRT monitors. So we had these big monster CRT monitors out in the shop next to our one machine, and then our second and third and fourth machines. And about 3 years in, we realized that was just not going to scale, right? So there's no way we could have Excel keep up with our growth. And we had about a dozen employees about 3 years in, and so we started looking for software to help run the shop. And as we got these demos from different software products out there that are designed for machine shops, we were just kind of dumbfounded that they just really weren't that well designed for actually running a machine shop, especially out on the shop floor, right? They did perfectly fine in the office, and you could do your estimating and quoting and send purchase orders and do that sort of thing. But when it came to the actual execution on the shop floor, which was, of course, our biggest focus, because that's where a machine shop makes its money, they just kind of left it alone. And it was up to the shop to develop their own systems or processes to have that be really smooth. So rather than buying one of those systems and still having lots of spreadsheets, we just decided to hire a software developer and build something strictly for ourselves, So we hired this guy named Matt. He happened to be a web developer, which was a little unusual back in 2000. But so ProShop was natively, and it wasn't called ProShop back then. It was just our own little program. And so we had all of our machinists and programmers, and as we grew and hired people, and as we got ISO certified and we got AS9100 certified, we just all the employees would tell Matt how, what feature they needed, what page they needed, what button they needed, what field they needed. And we just sort of organically built it over, many years. And it wasn't until about 2008 when about 8 years after starting to develop it, our biggest machine shop customer, which also had their own internal machine shop. They were an OEM manufacturer of aerospace hardware. And they had their own internal shop, but they outsourced a lot of business to shops like us.
Sure.
And their production manager came and worked for us on the weekends for a few months to earn some extra money. And he used ProShop, helping set up jobs and, run parts. And he said, where'd you guys buy this? I want to show this to the owners of our shop. And we said, no, we built it. And so anyway, he approached the owners, and they came and asked us if we would sell ProShop to them. And
Really?
we said no, it's not for sale. But after some discussions and negotiations, customers are always right. So we decided to give it a shot, and it went so incredibly well. And so just a couple of statistics. So they were a company of about 35 people at the time, doing about $8 million in revenue. And when they put ProShop in, they almost immediately, within just a couple of months, freed up 3 full-time overhead staff.
Wow.
They had 2 full-time expediters that were just running around expediting jobs all day. And they had 2 people in their planning department, and the workflows in ProShop allowed one person to completely do that job. So they freed up those people to do more value-added things rather than just strictly overhead functions. They had a perpetual late order list that was, I think they said, about 6 pages long all the time. Wow. And that pared down, to less than half a dozen items, within a couple of months. And so they were so pleased by that. And they said, can we introduce you to some of the other shops that also make parts for us, because they're struggling with delivery and quality and stuff. And so they basically asked us if we would sell ProShop to our direct competitors. So, which we said yes, and we sold it to another good sized shop in the Seattle area. Okay. They also had great results. And it was through that process that we said, you know what, guys, I think we're onto something here. Absolutely. And I think, there's something bigger that we need to do besides making parts. So sure. Let's sell the machine shop, and let's go full time into software.
That's an incredible story. So, just for the listeners who, may not understand some of the industry here, ISO and AS9100 are quality management systems. ISO is more of a general quality management system, whereas AS is strictly aerospace and defense. And it's pretty rigorous. It shows that you've done the rigor to put together a quality management system or business operating system to protect the customer and to protect your business. A couple other things is Excel being used is not uncommon. I've audited a lot of machine shops over the years, and Paul, you and I have spoke. It's not uncommon that Excel spreadsheets are used to run these, and you see these inefficiencies. So the results, I think, really speak for themselves. Like you said, those expediters, the people actually doing the scheduling, you got 2 or 3 people. Yeah. ERP software is something you should be looking at, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think a lot of shop owners, they're thrifty people generally. They want to pinch pennies and, get the most out of their dollars, because the machine shop business is a very low margin business, generally speaking. There's not a lot of free cash flow to spend on stuff. And, but I think a lot of folks that I've talked to, and just over the years, they're kind of tripping over dollars to pick up dimes, in a way. And with the right system, it can just dramatically improve the business and make it easier and freer flowing and far less firefighting, and just, really increase throughput, productivity, and profitability.
We are totally aligned on that one. Rewind the tape back to 1997. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
When you and your buddies decided, hey, let's go do this, was there a formal business plan, or was this more, you outlined your assumptions, you guys just started running forward, or it was even like back of the napkin?
Yeah, no, we did a little bit of planning, not a ton. None of us were business majors, so we were all more engineering type guys. But I remember, my stepdad was a business guy, and we brought him in to some of the discussions. In fact, he advised us not to start the business. Really? He said, go get some industry experience first, and then start a business. And we were like, nah, we just really want to go for it right now. But no, it was not a super formal process. We crunched some numbers and, did some back of the napkin type stuff, but it was not super formalized.
Yeah, no, that's not uncommon either. A lot of people, unless you're actually going for funding, as you point out, if you're going for funding, there's a need for a formal business plan. Otherwise, just have a really good action plan, list of assumptions, outline of action items you need to accomplish, and you can get there, as you guys are, have exhibited. The original goal of the company, so the original machine shop, what was your goal? Do you remember if you guys?
Okay, all right. So I will reveal more than I often do. So our original goal. So keep in mind, we were for our college career, we designed and built race cars.
Right.
We're all super motorheads. We love cars. We love driving fast. We love, the sound, the smells. We actually wanted to start a car company.
No kidding. That's
making a very small sort of niche car company, maybe no more than, 50 cars a year kind of thing, very high end, all machined parts and composites. And, that would be just as sexy underneath the hood than it is on the outside, But we knew that we didn't have enough money for that. And we said, you know what, we're going to need all these same kind of machines and people and processes. So here's how naive we were. We said, let's start a machine shop. And within no more than 2 or 3 years, we should have enough free time and free cash flow that we can invest in building prototypes and then go find some investors and really make a go for it. And, talk about naive. Yeah. So, many years in, still not a ton of free time. By the end of Friday afternoon, we're just so beat that all we want to do is, or we're still working on Saturdays to get jobs out. Sure. Anyway, so maybe someday still we'll start a car company, but that wasn't in the cards with ProShop.
That's really interesting. Looking at because a machine shop is so hands-on. I mean, I know a lot of owners of machine shops are very hands-on people.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Or that's where they typically come from, and then they move to the front office, own their own machine shop.
Absolutely.
So to go from that to being a software company, to make that pivot, right, where it's not so much hands-on. Right. How did you feel about that? I mean, did you have reservations about doing that?
I mean, once, of course, it was not in our original plan at all, of course. Once we saw the improvements that our, relatively small handful of customers were making, we were just so excited about the opportunity to do this. And yeah, I mean, we knew we would miss the parts making business. Although I'd say my actual partners and I got out of the physical making of the parts relatively early. We were probably all programmers and machinists, for the first 2 or 3 years. And then we started specializing in various things and hiring employees to do that work. We love, still to this day, the act of creating, taking a raw piece of material and creating a beautiful precision piece out of it is just so much fun. And I'm teaching my kids right now to program and going to go to a local customer here and make some parts with them. So yeah, we knew we'd miss it. But I always also say my wife was not disappointed that I no longer smelled like coolant every time I came home from work every day.
Definitely a plus.
I always smelled like coolant every day. So
not uncommon. So that's pretty interesting, relative to the pivot there. I know the one thing that's going to be on a lot of machine shop owners' minds, right, is, when you start out a machine shop, getting your first customer, your second customer, third customer, right? Because a lot of times, like you said, if you're starting out a machine shop, you're actually the one in there making the parts. So driving those sales, is there anything that you saw that, or from experience, that worked better, for you guys versus other people?
I think there's a few key things there. So first of all, I will readily admit we were not brilliant at this. We had the typical cycle where we would go do some sales. So we'd get some orders in, and then we'd scramble to get those orders out the door. And while we were scrambling, we wouldn't be doing sales.
Right.
So the month or two after that, sales would drop off.
Sure.
And then we would realize, oh no, we don't have enough work. So we'd go do sales and the cycle would repeat, and quite honestly, it was that in conjunction with 9/11, of course, happened about 4 years into starting our business. And we, of course, were near Seattle, so very much into the aerospace business, and 9/11 in the aftermath of that nearly put us out of business, right?
I'm sure. Yeah.
We were, we had just moved from a 4,000 square foot space to a 10,000 square foot space, like just a few months before, and had hired a bunch more people, and were just, going great guns. And we didn't respond well enough to that in terms of cutting our costs and, furloughing or laying people off, because we desperately didn't want to lay anyone off. But it wasn't until we actually met with a business advisor at our local small business development center that we're like, we need help. We're going to run out of money here shortly and have to close down. So they were immensely helpful, and they also coached us on sales. But so getting out of that trap of not focusing on sales all the time, one of the first things our advisor told us, you have to be sales driven all the time, right? You have to put resources into that constantly. And so not only did we really do that, but we also, I think even the first couple of years, we grew pretty fast. We went from just, a few of us to 12 people in about 3 years. We focused on making a really nice website. Okay. We made nice brochures. I even had a parts case. So I bought one of these aluminum briefcases and foam, and cut out the foam and put the parts in the briefcases, and then had a sort of a picture portfolio of bigger parts that I couldn't carry around.
Okay.
And I just, started knocking on doors and calling people and saying, hey, can I come talk with you? And I'd open up my parts case and I'd show them, and they'd be like, oh yeah, we have a part that looks like that one, and we talk about it, and, and so I think that was successful. But of course, early on in 2000, thereabouts, there wasn't as much competition online. So when I remember listening to this lady that had a website and maybe even a podcast, or she made videos or something about the importance of SEO. And so we put a lot of effort into that. And so for several years, if you would open up Google and type in, CNC machine shop, we were the number one organic result for nice. 3 years running. So we definitely had a number of, prospects, and we became not just local, but we had customers all around the country because they found us through our website.
And that's a great thing because of diversity, right? You're not just pigeonholed into one customer. And that's, I think, one of the biggest things that new machine shops fight when they're starting out. They've got 1 to 2 customers. Like you said, if they're working in the shop, they're not working on sales. This cycle is kind of, like you said, it's constantly up and down. But the Small Business Development Center, SBDC, I know other people have used that as a resource. I think that is a great resource. Do think it depends on your area and how involved they are. But
of course,
people should reach out. Especially if there's definite gaps you see and you're trying to plug holes, they can kind of point you in the right direction for that.
Yeah, we use other resources over the years too. There's, I'm sure of SCORE,
yes.
Right? And we also engaged with our local MEP company, Manufacturing Extension Partnership. That's here in Washington State. It's called, it used to be called something else. Now it's called Impact Washington. But we hired a lean consultant and an ISO consultant through them. So they helped us implement lean and ISO together. And so, there's definitely, I think also a lot of owners are very much do-it-yourselfers.
Yes.
Which is probably why they own a shop in the first place, right? They worked somewhere else, they got the skills, and they're like, I can do this better than my boss, or or they just wanted to strike out on their own, and so they're very independent folks, and but reaching out to get help when you need it is so important, because just because you're good or a good machinist, programmer, toolmaker does not make you a good business owner, right? And we learned that the hard way. We had no idea how to run an actual business. And we only grew in the beginning because times were good. The economy was flourishing. There was lots of work to be had. So we could have relatively, low low business skills and still, grow and do well.
It's kind of like the stock market, right? Everybody invests in a bull market. Everybody thinks they're a great investor, and then the bear
Yeah,
market hits, and you're like, "Oh, what happened?" So yeah, it really kind of
exactly.
separates the wheat from the chaff at that point.
Sure.
So knowing that you were involved in this machine shop that had a slow kind of ramp up sales cycle, right? When you guys saw this kind of onslaught of asks for the ProShop ERP, which wasn't called ProShop at the time, but
Right.
for your custom designed ERP software, you guys were probably very in tune to that, is what I'm thinking. You guys were probably like, wow, this is just a totally different ballgame, right?
Yeah, I mean, after doing this a couple of times and having different vendors and customers, and when we got audited by the ISO and AS auditors, and we showed them, because we built all the QMS functions into ProShop too. So we're using ProShop exclusively to do the audits.
Right.
They're like, holy cow, this is the most impressive system I've ever seen. Can I tell some of my other customers about you?
Yeah.
We're like, no, not yet. Or no, but yeah, it was just through that kind of feedback and discussions that we really realized that there was, a bigger opportunity and just the importance of supporting other manufacturers, who are struggling with bad software or too many spreadsheets and.
Yeah, it's from a quality audit standpoint, because that's where I got involved with machine shops.
Right.
Usually you have a very large amount of disconnected systems. You've got to go here for this answer, here for this answer. So having it all in one place eliminates a lot of inefficiencies within a shop. So I totally understand the benefit behind that.
Yeah, we have clients who even say now that they don't do any prep work for audits.
Yeah.
Right. The auditor just comes, they say, all right, come on in. There's no scrambling for days and weeks in advance, which I know most shops deal with.
Sure.
And they just audit the live system. Everything's linked. Everything's right there. You can just, and actually it plays obviously perfectly during COVID to virtual audits because it's all on the screen already. Everything's scanned, everything's there. But yeah, no, that
definitely makes sense.
Yeah.
You mentioned about 9/11 being kind of a hardship, right?
Oh yeah.
Go back and look at 2008, right? The whole crash of the automotive economy. I mean, how ingrained were you guys in automotive business? And did that really affect you guys at all?
It certainly did. It wasn't nearly as bad for us as 2001 and 2. Partly because we'd already been through it once before and we kind of knew what we needed to do to survive it. But also by then we were really well diversified and we were very not heavily into automotive at all.
Okay.
So we kind of had a rule of thumb that we didn't want to have any one customer a greater percentage of our business than our overall profit margin.
Sure. That makes sense.
So we could have one customer completely dry up and disappear and not replace them and still break even, conceptually. So
you guys took that approach to I call it bulletproofing your business, right? Against these large factors like COVID comes,
sure,
people are just knocked off their chair. But
right.
You guys had the foresight to say, hey, I'm going to plan that only a certain portion of my revenue comes from major customers, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, there were times in our growth where we'd have one customer just really come on strong and want to give us tons of orders. And we would generally not say no to those, but we would invest in growing the other parts of the business as well. And there were years where we grew 50, 60, 70%, as a machine shop, which is hard. But no, I mean, we tried to have no customer more than like 10% of our business. So, and we had lots of them that were, 2-3%. So we had, dozens and dozens of really good, solid customers. So 2008, we managed it pretty well. We cut back some hours. The owners cut back their pay quite a bit for a while, but we didn't have to lay anyone off in 2008. And of course, as things came back, so many shops went out of business through that period of time.
Sure. We
just really grew like crazy. After things started getting better because there were fewer competitors.
Right. So then you go from this business that's really heavy working capital because you've got all the raw materials, you've got labor and overhead that you got to deal with. And you guys pivot to the software business, which
Mm-hmm.
has high margin rates, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was that kind of a shock for you guys in a little bit to get used to in the beginning?
I mean, it's a very different kind of business, of
Yeah.
course. And so there was lots of learning curves for us, and there still are. But we've been doing it now about 5 years. But yeah, I mean, the higher margins were certainly nice. You know, we've put almost every single penny right back into investment. You know, we've grown from 4 people to 40 people. You know, doubling during COVID, from 20 to 40. So yeah, I mean, we're just throwing it all back into new development, and making the product better support systems, better implementation. But it is definitely an easier kind of business to run than a machine shop.
Like you said, it's a different business, right? It has its own hardships in different ways. Sure. I have to ask, the original programmer you talked about, the web developer,
yeah,
still with the company?
He's one of the founders of ProShop. Yeah.
Awesome. No, I love that. So, I mean, when you look at, this software offers a lot of benefits to machine shops overall. And you and I kind of share some very similar values, right? We want to see small businesses do well. We want to see these machine shops do well. We realize it's all about job creation and helping the local economies. What are some of the biggest obstacles you see right now around that space?
That a machine shop would be facing right now, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, definitely COVID economy has created.
Of course, yeah, that's just thrown so many companies for a loop. And it's interesting because it's not been even, right? Some shops fared very well through it and thrived even, and others were, super devastated. But I mean, clearly, finding employees, finding skilled talent is perhaps the number one issue. Because that's universal, right? Even the shops that survived pretty well through COVID and grew. I mean, we had a client in Colorado that grew 40% during 2020, right? So they were just positioned well enough with the right mix of customers and industries that they actually did well. But whether you're doing well or not doing well, shops still can't find enough people to fill all the jobs that they have to. So that's a big one, of course. There's I think a lot of companies, I mean, access to capital is relatively easy now. It's interesting. There's probably never been a time where starting a machine shop was any easier than it is today, right? You can buy a 5-axis Haas for $120,000 now. It's amazing. You can get CAM software for even just a few $100 a year. That's good software, right? So there's the barriers to entry are lower and lower than they've ever been, I think. But which means that a lot of shops are being started, are being formed, but they're, like we talked about earlier, they're these men and women who were sort of an expert in their craft. They were a technician, they were a programmer, a toolmaker, a machinist, and they said, what, I can do this myself. Have you read the book, The E-Myth? Are you familiar with that book?
Great.
Okay.
Love that.
Yeah, great book. So yeah, for anyone watching, if you haven't read it, go out and get it right away. It's a super easy read. Yes. But basically the myth is that if you're an expert in your craft, you'll be good at running a business that does that thing, right? Which is not the case.
The truth.
Yeah. So because it's just a very different skill set, right? Anyway, but we read that book very early in our business, and that actually informed a lot of the way we ran our shop and even the way we built our software. We built it to be very business process driven, and we embraced this idea of building our business like a franchise prototype, even though we never expected to have more than one location. But
that's you hit the nail on the head. I've actually gifted that book to a couple people for awesome. Very specific reasons. Related to what you mentioned. But a lot of people don't take the time to put the process in place. Everything's a process. I look at everything as a process, and that's just my quality and operations background that, you kind of get tuned into that. How do I break this down to step by step? And you guys managed to do that and do it well enough where you're able to, implement the right tools to fix things. And, you talk about the challenges around machine shops. I totally agree. The skilled labor piece is a huge gap. I mean, everybody will admit that, but I don't see as many people doing stuff about it as they should. Having those conversations early on, and I know you're pretty active trying to, help solve that issue. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing in that space? Yeah,
I mean, we grew in our shop from 0 to 75 people, and so we had to find a lot of bodies. So I think we try to teach and talk about some of the things that were successful for us. So we had a local community college right here in our town, Bellingham, Washington, and we had typically 2 employees on their advisory board all the time. Awesome. Trying to help the program get better, but also selfishly, we wanted to recruit the cream of the crop every year, to come work for us rather than somewhere else. So that was very successful for us. And we also recruited from the university program that we graduated from as well. So we did that. We really focused on having a great culture and putting that on our website and talking about that. And I mean, we even applied, for example, for this in not only fastest growing companies, in Washington State, the main, business magazine had their own sort of fastest growing companies, thing every year. But we even applied for the Inc. 5000 or Inc. 500. And we were on the Inc. 5000 5 times. And
that's very cool.
And so applying for those, getting the PR that results from that. But we also applied for like the best companies to work for. That was another different publication that published that list. And so we were on that list 2 or 3 times. And so we tried not only to have a really great culture, but to then publicize that outside the business, because we realized that we had to almost sell to potential employees just as much as we had to sell to customers.
Right.
We had a concerted effort for that all the time. And word got out. The machining business is in every local economy. It's a very small group, right? There's, there's dozens to maybe hundreds of shops, but they all, depending on your part of the country, but the machinists all know each other and they talk and they move companies. And so we always had a pretty good stream of employees machinists trying to, apply at our shop. So there's a number of different things. In fact, I just wrote a blog post about this just 2-3 weeks ago. About how to mitigate the lack of skilled machinists. So we could maybe put those in the show notes, but yeah, there's a lot of companies could use some more outside the box thinking to try to solve this problem for themselves.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of avenues, because I'm over by the Chicago area, heavily, heavy manufacturing area, a lot of aerospace, defense. But I don't see people really being as creative and thinking about how they can impact this. Because to the point of you going out to the community colleges or you going to the high schools and encouraging those programs, those are breeding grounds for the next generation of people. And
absolutely,
a lot of kids don't get involved in that stuff because they just don't know about it, or they maybe have a jaded view or a different perspective that's been,
or their parents do,
right? Exactly.
and the guidance counselors do
through the generations.
Yeah.
And once they get exposed to it and they realize that, the intricacies of it and the challenge of it, and it is kind of fun. It's like putting a puzzle, right? I mean, there's
and it's high tech and it's clean and it's, absolutely. Yeah.
And, I see like organizations like there's the Technology Manufacturing Association of Illinois, and they have programs where they're doing CNC 101 and different manufacturing programs. And they're a paid membership program here, but out in the northwest suburbs where I am, there are people that know about it and they subscribe to it, and they actually have their people go through training there.
Right.
Key, I think you alluded to, is the succession planning, right? If you have a good succession plan that rewards people for doing good deeds and doing good work, you can bring them up through to become trainers, and you can create your own internal training program. right?
Yeah, and in fact, we focused heavily on that at our company ProCNC. We actually developed and built as part of ProShop. We built a company positions module,
Mm-hmm.
and that fed into like an org chart structure.
Sure.
With training requirements for every single position. So we built a whole training and tasks modules. So when we hired an employee and assigned them as an entry-level machinist, for example, they could see all the training that they needed to get if they didn't already have it. And they could see what was required as a setup machinist and as a day shift lead and as a programmer. Because a lot of machinists ultimately want to get to that programming seat, just because it's fun. And we just kind of gave them a roadmap, of what training they needed to get if they wanted to go get there.
Well, and that transparency builds trust with the employees. They see it now. It's clear as day to them what they need to do to get to that next level.
Yeah.
So I mean that's you're thinking at the forefront, kind of driving that, which that's amazing. And I wish more people were embracing that type of thought process. But
the word transparency, I appreciate you saying that, because we had that sort of as a philosophy throughout our entire shop. We were completely open book. So every month we would have a full company meeting, and we'd share the financials, how much money we made, how much money we lost in a bad month. We'd highlight the best jobs that we made money on and why, the worst jobs we lost money on and why. And those were not finger pointing, by the way. Those were like, where did the process break down that we lost money on this job, right? Did I personally, underestimate it? Did we have a problem with contract review where we missed an important detail that bit us later? Did we not have something in our programming or fixturing or whatever process? Sure. And we had the employees involved in those jobs talk about them, and it wasn't a point of shame. It was a point of, what can we learn from this to make sure we don't do this again?
That's very progressive thinking. And I applaud you there, Paul. That takes a lot of maturity as a leadership team to do that. There's a lot of times leadership teams, the ego gets in the way of that. And I think if you break down your ego and you look as a true team, everybody can learn, everybody can participate in the solution.
Sure.
Like you said, get away from the finger pointing. I mean,
absolutely.
I'm not saying if you have a bad apple, don't pay attention.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That's a given in my mind.
Yeah.
But if you've got a lot of good employees, and people are willing to work hard for you, bring them into the loop, be transparent, show them what's behind the curtain, because they will come to you with solutions. It's pretty amazing.
Oh, absolutely. They will. Yeah. And especially as I mentioned lean, we went through a pretty formalized process of like onboarding through a lean consultant, all of our lean processes. And fortunately, my partner, Kelsey, was just so passionate about this that for several years, he was our lean champion. Once we got big enough, we hired, a specific just lean champion in the company. But, I think because we had that culture of openness and everyone contributing and sharing, like our engagement in our lean processes were off the charts. We even put in our user module in ProShop, we have time tracking targets. Mm-hmm. So each employee, based on their role, will have targets of how much time they should be spending in their typical 40-hour work week on different types of activities. And we always had Kaizen as like 5%.
Awesome.
Every employee should be spending 5% of their whole week on improvement activities. And we had Kaizen newspaper teams, like 5 or 6 different ones in the company. We had the front office, we had the programming department, we had our horizontal mill area, we had the lathe area, we had the prototype department, we had our assembly department, and they all had Kaizen newspapers. And we trained all of our employees on the waste of the Toyota production system. And we said, if you see yourself performing one of these wastes, go write it down on the newspaper board. And then the team in that area will look at that every week, come up, engage you, come up with a solution and work through and solve that problem.
Sure.
And people were just, people put down dozens of items every week. And we completed thousands of Kaizen newspaper tickets over many years.
A couple of important points there. So for the listeners, Kaizen is Japanese for continuous improvement, right? Just keep driving the continuous improvement engine, as I call it, right?
Yep.
But there's a couple things here. One, you got people self-reporting when they see waste. And
they need to know what the wastes are first.
Right. Identifying it, and then there's people who take corrective action. But the other piece to point out is you're planning time for it. You're putting 5% of the time in there because it's necessary, and you know the value of it. And
yep.
Shops that are out there and you haven't done a Kaizen event in a year or two, or maybe even longer, you really got to ask yourself why you're not planning time to get better, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So do you know the name Paul Akers?
Paul Akers. I do.
Yeah. He wrote the book 2 Second Lean.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard of that book. Great book. But he owns a company called FastCap, and he is one of the sort of gurus of Kaizen and continuous improvement.
Sure.
And so, yeah, Google him and look it up. But his company is right here in our town. Okay. So we just had the fortunate to be able to go visit his shop, talk to him as well, have him come visit our shop. So we just kind of got indoctrinated into this idea of always continuously improving your company. And they take it even further. Like the first 30 minutes of every single day, the entire company works on Kaizen improvements before they even start making any parts.
So it's number one.
Every single day.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's really neat.
I love hearing people have taken those concepts and implemented them.
Yeah, and his book 2 Second Lean is another great book. Super easy read, and definitely recommend to your audience.
Definitely check that one out. I've been through lean training in my past in automotive and aerospace and stuff. I've been through Six Sigma, but you can never learn too much about that. That's one thing I'll say.
Oh, for sure.
Always learn.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Paul, I have to ask you, what was the biggest obstacle when you look at, going from the machine shop to ProShop, right? And where you guys are at ProShop, what was the biggest obstacle moving forward on ProShop?
I mean, at the very beginning, it was just getting the word out that we even existed. It's a very crowded space, as you probably know. There's literally hundreds of products out there that are claiming to be manufacturing ERP products.
Yes.
And some are very big and lots are small, but it's a very noisy space. So just, getting the word out was, I'd say, one of our biggest challenges. And even just learning how to run a software company, right? It's just so different. So the software we needed to run the company, that was a learning curve for us. The whole sales cycle and sales process, and how do we educate people, and we've taken an approach of really kind of putting our customers first and doing we're very fortunate to have just a high number of just crazy passionate customers that are just advocates to the day's end, so if we're like, hey, would you make a video with us? They're like, absolutely, come on and let's do it, and so we've done, I think, almost 20 customer testimonial videos, like highly produced, nice on-site, a lot of case studies. That social proof, I think, is what a lot of shop owners, or any buyer of anything these days, they need to see that, right? They're skeptical, as they should be. And hearing something out of a salesperson's mouth doesn't mean nearly as much as hearing it straight from another shop owner that has a very similar type of business that they have. So I'd say, just getting, sort of getting our foot in the door, getting our name in the conversation. There's a few specifically in the machine shop business, there's a 3 or 4, really widely used software products out there that every shop has heard of. It's kind of like Kleenex, those brand names just become part of the lexicon. Yeah. And ProShop obviously was not. And hopefully, I think we're making progress. But
wait, do you have your own marketing department, or do you rely on an outsourced marketing firm? How did you guys handle that challenge?
Yeah, no, we do that all ourselves. At this point, we do have company that advises us a little bit, but all of the strategy and the content creation comes from us. And in fact, I mean, that's my department. I did that at ProCNC, the machine shop, and now I do that here. And so for the first 4 years, it was, I was the sales department, and I hired an assistant who became sort of our marketing coordinator, okay. Sarah. She's amazing. But even just so thinking about even just relating this back to the E-Myth and business process and scaling, we call it, founder-led sales, right? I was the only one. Our phone number on our website, would come to my cell phone, right. And, the email would come directly to my inbox. But of course, that's not scalable. So we thought about, the whole way along, I was thinking about, well, I need to prototype my position, right? What I do as a salesperson, what I do as a technical demo specialist, what I do as, a marketing person. And eventually I'm going to have those job descriptions well-defined enough mm-hmm. that I can much more easily hire someone to replace myself in that role, and I'll work on something more strategic.
Absolutely.
Right. And so at this point, just last year, actually, we hired, our team, our sales and marketing team went from 2 people to 7 people. Mm-hmm. And now I don't really do sales, and the phone number doesn't come to my cell phone, and I don't get the emails from our website. But that same concept is also just a really important, and as having read the E-Myth, what I'm talking about, this whole idea of structuring your company. Every shop owner, especially in a small company, they wear 20 different hats on a daily basis, right? You're the sales guy, you're the accounting person, you're the setup machinist, you're the programmer, you're the janitor, you're the HR person. And so if you can think about everything you do in terms of what hat am I currently wearing, right. And how do I document what I'm doing in such a way that it makes it easier to replace myself, you'll start taking your name off the org chart in 20 spots, and pretty soon you're only the CEO, right. And you work on strategic things on the business, not in the business.
And I've had that conversation with other business owners, and a lot of people are like, "Oh, you don't understand. I'm too busy to do this." Just take out a sheet of paper. Just start writing down, right? What you're doing. Sure. Just sequence. Right. Okay, yeah, it's a little bit of time to invest, but the time you're going to save on the back end is tremendously huge. Like you said, it frees you up to do the next level and start thinking about strategy more, and how do you bring people in to improve the business. And if you're not sure how to do it, there's plenty of people out there, consultants, contractors, who do that stuff. So bring them into the loop. If you're not good at writing things out or whatever, you need help, bring in somebody, get an intern.
Yeah.
Find somebody who can do it. There's no excuse why you can't do it, is I guess what I'm getting at.
Yeah. It is easier said than done, but it is totally doable.
Yes.
And in fact, we built this concept. Basically, we built this all into ProShop. I mean, that is, I think, how we successfully went from 0 to 75 people. Mm-hmm. Was we really were thinking almost the whole time about business process and how do we build systems so that we are, because most, when someone says they're too busy, it's usually because they're fighting fires, right? They may just, there may be fewer fires in some shops than another, but there's a lot of things that are causing a lot of waste, a lot of scrambling, a lot of last minute stuff, which is very inefficient, right? And takes very time consuming. And by thinking just a little bit more proactively up front about what are some of the steps that I can do to minimize that firefighting on the back end, mm-hmm. That has huge returns on your time investment.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And so, I think that was one of our secrets of our success to be able to grow the company as well as we did, was we really had that focus all the way along after reading the E-Myth. That was really what cemented it in our mind.
Interesting. Paul, you guys have a webinar coming up on CMMC.
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So many of our clients, not all, but many are in the aerospace and or defense business, or they work for the government some way or another. And as for those that aren't familiar with it, CMMC stands for Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. Mm-hmm. And it is a requirement that is coming down the pipeline. It's here for some companies today, and it'll be rolling out over the next about 5 years to 2026, where any company that works within the sort of government supply chain And if they participate in anything that has controlled unclassified information, or CUI, could be, a drawing for, a missile part, or a part that goes into a nuclear submarine, or whatever. They will be required to get a third-party certification through CMMC, probably at level 3. Most machine shops will be at level 3. There's 5 levels. Anyway, so this is a requirement. It's primarily built off of a NIST standard called NIST 800-171, which is a cybersecurity spec that has so far been self-auditing. It was okay to just self-certify, but that's going away. It's going to be third-party certification. And if a company thinks that going for ISO certification or AS9100 is challenging, it's a walk in the park compared to what CMMC is going to be. And so what we've been doing, and this got on our radar about 2 years ago. So we started building a whole bunch of features in ProShop to allow our customers to be compliant. So because we have many that are in that aerospace defense kind of space. So from, building two-factor authentication, into ProShop, to password complexities and auditing capabilities and monitoring things built right in. But there's so much more than what an ERP system can manage, right? There's all the other things related to the physical security of your facility, assets. How do you handle your laptops, your computers, every device that attaches to your network or your employees are using. So there's just a whole bunch of stuff there. Employee training is a really big one. So we've been not only building features to help ProShop be compliant itself, and we have the options to do like GovCloud hosting, because most of our clients are on our cloud service. So using the AWS GovCloud, which is being designed for compliance to that as well. But again, because there's so much outside the ERP, we're also building what we call a cybersecurity flying start package. And we got the idea for this because we've been providing a quality management one for years, where basically when a customer gets ProShop, they get all the modules with quality procedures and tasks and training and corrective actions and all that. But typically those modules are empty of content, right? And they can put in their own quality system. But we had so many companies asking us, hey, we don't have anything. Do you have something that you can help us with? And we realized that at ProCNC, we had built up this incredible library of business processes and tasks and training and company positions and how it all tied back into the standard itself. So we basically done this so we could then provide that as like a one-time purchase of content that we would then include in their system. And we've now helped, dozens and dozens of companies go get actually certified to ISO or AS, within like 6 months of getting ProShop, because it's in a way kind of handed to them on a platter.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, so we're basically doing the same thing with CMMC. So we've built a whole bunch of new business processes and tasks, and even a set of what we call parts, which is an unusual way to think about it. But the way that we think of the parts module in ProShop is it outlines the requirements of something you need to do. Normally, it's building a part to a certain rev level, but we use it for all sorts of things. I mean, we used to issue work orders and have parts, I'm using air quotes, like for buying a new CNC machine. We had a defined business process. This is what we do when we buy a CNC machine, right? And we would have a part with all the different research steps and calling the electrician and calling the contractor to put the concrete pad in. And we would issue a work order to manage the workflow of that process, and we would do that 2-3 times a year. We'd issue a work order to buy a machine and follow that process. So we're basically doing the same thing with CMMC, where we've put in, at this point, we have level 1 fully in there. So some of our clients are beta testing this with us, where we're basically injecting into their system a whole set of records to help them understand the journey to get to CMMC compliance, and work orders that they can issue internally to track that progress, project manage it, and then ultimately use it to show the auditor how they've gotten compliance. So anyway, part of it is just education. I mean, of course, this is a webinar for anyone that wants to listen. I did a poll just a few months ago on LinkedIn, and like 40% of respondents had no idea what CMMC was, right? And so and my network's pretty heavily just machine shops. I don't really accept a lot of other people into it. So people need to understand this. It is coming. It's not optional if you're going to be part of that government supply chain. So we're trying to inform and then share what we're doing to help make the process a little less scary.
Sure. No, that totally makes sense. I've gone through the CMMC registered practitioner training. And
oh, have you? Nice.
I think CMMC is a very poorly understood aspect by a lot of people. So it's I appreciate what you're doing there, because one of the things I see is small businesses are going to need a lot of help with this.
They sure will.
Because I think there's a lot of people out there who are kind of staging to benefit by charging huge prices for this. And that's, it's unethical, which is, definitely not part of what CMMC was created for. And even there's a governing body that's supposed to oversee that, CMMC-AB, that's supposed to prevent it. But I just don't want to see people taken advantage of. So I appreciate you guys are taking and building things like this into the system. And to, people listening, I mean, when you go for ISO compliance, without having anything that's like in a package, it could easily take you a year to get ready for ISO or AS 9100. To really get ramped up and to understand and get your procedures in place. So there's a huge benefit to having, something in a box that you can take and readily implement. Let me ask you this, Paul. For the listeners on the podcast here, is there any way, better to reach out and get a hold of you if they're interested in reviewing ProShop? Because I think you mentioned you could use it for a variety of things. It doesn't have to be a machine shop. Anything that's a work order generating system, this could apply to. So how could people get a hold of you for that?
Yeah. I mean, our website, ProShopERP.com. Okay. And we also have, if they're looking for maybe a little bit of humor and a little more fun, on Valentine's Day, we released a whole new website called LoveYourERP.com.
Love your ERP.
Because love and ERP never go together in the same sentence. But quite honestly, as we were doing a lot of these customer videos and talking to them, and we'd be getting these organic like reviews on Capterra or something, the word love just kept coming up, and we're like, really, you love it, and so we ran with it, and I'm like, yeah, loveyourarp.com is available, so I'm going to buy that anyway. So it's fun. It's hot pink. There's hearts floating throughout the whole website. It's hilarious. But
LOVE.
LOVE.
Yep.
Yourerp.com.
Interesting.
But yeah, ProShopERP.com. We try to be as transparent as we possibly can be. We have a video library with dozens and dozens of videos about how ProShop works. We have a whole best practices area where, different conferences we've talked at. I even gave a whole speech at the Top Shops conference in 2017 about the idea of a machine shop franchise prototype. Nice. Based on the eMyth. So there's lots of great stuff there. Great place to learn about what we're doing.
So one last question for you before you go. Advice to a small business owner, entrepreneur who wants to get out and get into the manufacturing space. What's your words of advice?
You mean start a shop?
Start a shop.
Start a shop. If it's like the typical shop owner where they're a technician, they're an expert, they're a programmer, they're a machinist, they know their craft, I would say really think about how you want to structure the business processes. Find advisors, find people that are good at that side of things. Don't just assume because you're a great machinist, you're going to have an easy time of running a shop. It's just not the case. There are some naturals that seem to do really well, but it's, running a shop is much more difficult than making parts. So yeah, I'd say don't go it alone, find advisors, and really think strategically about what you want out of the company, what the company might even look like in 5 or 10 years. Do you want a large shop? Do you want a smaller lifestyle business? And that sort of future thinking can even help inform how you want to structure the business on day one, right? I always say, even draw out your org chart of kind of your ideal end case scenario, right? And for some people, they love the technical aspects. They want to always continue being a machinist and programmer and, have a team to help them do that. And others, want to eventually be focused on customers and strategy and growth and acquisitions or whatever. So envisioning what that's going to look like for you ultimately will help you along that path.
Great advice.
When you're first starting out.
And definitely pick up yourself a copy of the E-Myth, right?
Oh yeah. E-Myth. Checklist Manifesto is another good book. Not as easy a read, but the idea of using checklists in your company, incredibly powerful. That book, just maybe this is a tangent, but so that in that book, a medical researcher did research on using checklists prior to surgeons doing surgery. Mm-hmm. And they found that when they put a checklist in, and it was inspired by a pre-flight checklist for pilots. Mm-hmm. That's where the guy got the idea. So when they put a checklist in before a surgeon does surgery, and of course, surgeons are some of the most highly trained, skilled people in the world. Exactly. They could reduce the chance of deaths from some complication by 40%.
Wow. That's a huge number.
It's crazy. It's mind-blowing.
The guy on the table.
Yes. So if a surgeon can have that much of a better outcome by using a checklist, think about what a machinist can do with a checklist or anything within a manufacturing company, right? Because we're doing really complex things, right, in building these precision parts, and expecting someone to get all the details right every time out of their head is just not realistic. And so, checklists and that goes along with just the whole concept of business processes, right?
Great advice.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us on the podcast. A lot of great information, Jared, here, a lot for people to digest. What we talked about, I'm going to put into the show notes afterwards so people will see them. And definitely want to thank you again for taking the time there, Paul.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun today.
Take care. Thank you for joining us on this podcast. To reach out to Paul and learn more, you can find him on LinkedIn under Paul Van Metre, or you can go to the ProShopERP.com Contact Us page. Additional links discussed during the podcast are below. That includes the ProShopERP.com website, LoveYourERP.com website, the SAE Formula One online site, the E-Myth book, Checklist Manifesto book, SBDC and Score websites. If you want to recommend somebody to appear on the podcast as a guest, please email us at info@opsqc.com. If you're interested in sponsoring a podcast, please reach out to us at the same email. We'd love to have your support.